Hello there. Can you hear me out there? Is that sound level okay? Beautiful. I would also like to acknowledge my colleagues here tonight. It's lovely to see you here. I've been given the task of talking about the local economy in Yarra Ranges, and I've got to say that's a very dry subject, and I'll try and keep it as interesting as I possibly can, because economics is one of those areas where people do tend to glaze over a bit. But the reason I'm talking about the local economy in Yarra Ranges tonight is to paint a picture of what are the key drivers in our economy, and that's what I was asked to talk about, and where the timber industry fits within that local economy. So I'll give it a go. I hope it's not too boring, because there's lots of facts and figures and percentages in there. It is an important story to tell, but it is a little dry. So just to let you know, these figures have come out of the ABS and some other work that the Shire of Yarra Ranges has done in terms of drilling down on our economic profiling. Now, the reason I've been asked to talk about the local economy is because we hear that the timber industry is a significant economic, environmental and social contributor to our local economy. So to paint that picture for you, Yarra Ranges is 2,500 square kilometres. We have a population of 146,000 people. We consist of 35,000 jobs in Yarra Ranges. By far, the retail industry employs the most workers in Yarra Ranges. At 6,400 workers, that's around 18% of our workforce is in the retail industry. In terms of agriculture, forestry and fishing, and the way industry sectors work is they actually group all of those areas together. Now, for agriculture, we have 1,700 people employed in the agricultural industry. It actually makes up 5% of our total employment in Yarra Ranges. Most of that is in fact in the agricultural industry. And when we drill down and we look at how many workers are in the forestry industry, it is 91 workers, or 0.3% of the workforce of Yarra Ranges. So that's the employment. Now I'm going to talk about how that translates to dollars. Now, we have some really key industries in Yarra Ranges, and it might come as a bit of a surprise to you that at the top of the list is manufacturing. So by far, manufacturing brings in the most money for Yarra Ranges. It's followed very closely by property and business, retail, education and construction. Now, tourism is also a very key driver in our economy, but it doesn't have a classification of its own. And the reason it doesn't have a classification of its own is because it cuts over a lot of industries. So there's a lot of cafe in there, there's a lot of retail, there's a lot of agriculture. So we have to use different calculations for tourism, but it doesn't have its own industry sector. Now, I can talk about dollars in two ways, and I'm going to talk about dollars in two ways because it's just different ways of measuring the value in our economy. And the first way I'm going to talk about it is what's called gross industry output. And what that actually means is all the revenue that's made by our industry sectors. So if you looked at the Shire, every single business in the Shire added up how much revenue they generate, it's $9 billion. When we drill that down, manufacturing is $3 billion of that. When we drill it down to agriculture, which is where forestry sits, it's $381 million. When we drill it down to forestry, it's $24 million. And that represents 0.2% of our local economy in those gross terms. I'm going to talk now about what's called value-added revenue, and I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a economic geek, so I love all these terms, so I apologise to those who really hate those terms. But value-added stuff is basically the money you get in, the money you have to pay to produce the good you're making. So it's basically another measure of how valuable that business is. So when we look at the value-added revenue in the Shire of Yarra Ranges, so remembering first we generated a pool of $9 billion. Once all those businesses pay for those business inputs, we end up with $3.5 billion worth of value-added revenue in the Shire. Now, once again, manufacturing hits the top of the list by a country mile, $672 million worth of revenue, 19% of our economy. Agriculture, where forestry fits in, $210 million. And when we drill down to where forests fit in that, $12 million, or 0.3% of our local economy. Now, I haven't touched on costs in relation to infrastructure, and that's costs that taxpayers and ratepayers bear in relation to damage to roads, damage to bridges, wear and tear on general infrastructure from the logging industry. I'm not actually going to talk about that tonight because that's probably outside the scope of what I'm here to talk about. I also want to say, I'm saying that timber workers should have a job, but it's actually time to transition to plantation and get out of our native forests. So don't mistake this as an anti-industry or an anti-job. This is actually about the true facts of the economics of the matter. Now, I'm sure someone here tonight is probably going to talk about transitioning to the plantation industry, and they're probably far more capable of doing that than me. I haven't talked about wood chips either. We've heard a bit about that already. And the fact that over 80% of our forests are wood chips, or of the logged forests are wood chipped. I'm sure that'll be covered tonight too. But when the industry says they're a significant driver in our economy, we must look at the facts. And what I've outlined to you tonight is the facts of our economy. There is no disputing that data. Manufacturing is truly a force in Yarra Ranges, but I haven't talked about tourism yet, and I think that's where our future lies. There's a significant number of businesses in tourist regions, and Healesville is of course a tourist region, that benefit directly and indirectly from tourism. It operates, as I said earlier, over a number of different sectors because it covers such a range of different things. Our current calculations in relation to tourism is that it actually is worth $381 million per annum to Yarra Ranges, and it employs over 2,000 people. At the moment, it represents 4% of our economy and nearly 6% of our employment. So I think it's really clear what the fundamental drivers of our economy are in Yarra Ranges. Certainly as a council, we see strength in preserving our environment, to encourage greater visitation rates of tourists, because it is in fact the natural beauty of our area that attracts people to the region, and that's whether you're a resident or a visitor. We know as a council that Yarra Ranges has long been recognised as a special place of natural beauty and diverse habitats. We're very privileged in this shire. We have 3 of the state's emblems here. That speaks volumes of the sort of habitat and biodiversity values that we have in the shire. It is a very significant factor as to why people come and visit us. We know that we have significant areas of remnant native vegetation, much of which is botanically and zoologically significant, provides important habitat for our wildlife. We know that in the shire, particularly the Yarra Valley, is gaining local and international recognition as a fine food and wine producing area. It's something we encourage by funding the Yarra Ranges, Yarra Valley and Dandenong's marketing board, because we're committed to a future in tourism in Yarra Ranges. Every single year, 3 million visitors visit the Yarra Ranges Shire, and they're generally going to the Yarra Valley, the townships spread throughout the Shire, or the Dandenong Ranges. As a council, we don't think the government should be allowing the ongoing logging of our native forests in Talangi. And I haven't even mentioned water catchments tonight, but that's a whole nother issue. We know that that logging will have a significant impact on tourism in the region. We know that Healesville is a town trying to get back to a stable trading environment. And we know that tourism is a great way to secure your future in Healesville. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. I'll now ask if there are a couple of brief questions for Councillor McRae and Councillor Dunn. No questions?
Yeah, I want Councillor Dunn.
Okay.
Voted
Okay. Is the 91 people working in the timber industry in Yarra Ranges directly in mills? Councillor Dunn.
The 91 people directly working in the forestry industry are those as marked as in census forms in the latest census collection as under the forestry industry sector. I'd be happy to share some data with you that shows that if we look at the multiplier effect of those 91 jobs, you get to 220 jobs. Bearing in mind we've got 35,000 jobs in Yarra Ranges, you are not a key industry driver.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Councillor Dunn.